Now, the first thing I want to say is that people from IR, political scientists, often talk about the hegemonic power and how the hegemon will try to create a regime, a global regime, where the trading system or any other type of system that's set up will primarily benefit the hegemon, but also to some extent the member states as an inducement to go along with the regime. So keep that in mind in the back of your heads, because the question that we have to address first is, well, how does the hegemon decide what he's going to do? And that's going to take us inside the state, which IR normally doesn't go. Fortunately, sociology does go inside the state. Well, if you look inside the state, and of course we all know that the current hegemon is the United States, what we have right now, I argue, and there are scholars like William Domhoff, C. Wright Mills, and a number of U.S. congressional committees, is that we have, on one hand, a very class-conscious elite in the United States, whereas Marx would call them a class for themselves. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying this is organized in any very specific way. In fact, most of what I'm going to say to you is going to be very gray. It's give and take. It's in the process of. But there is an elite class that understands its interests, unlike maybe the working class that makes up a false class consciousness. And when I talk about the elite or the upper class, I'm using it synonymously with the corporations or the corporate class, because they are the owners of the corporations, especially when you look at who owns the majority of the stock in the United States. It's the elite, it's not the working class. It's amongst the corporate community. And they often form what we refer to as either direct or indirect interlocks. That is, they share common members of the board of directors. And although there's still competition in the corporate world, what these corporate interlocks do is reduce it or try to create somewhat of a common business agenda, but not just a common business agenda, but also a common political agenda. And again, we have U.S. congressional committees that have investigated this. So you do have a corporate, upper class, common class consciousness. And what happens is they take their wealth, and again, this is documented in many different sources. They take their wealth, and on the one hand, what they do is they try to influence policy formation through very deep funding of think tanks, policy groups, and so forth. And what most people don't realize is that a lot of these think tanks are not staffed necessarily by academics. They're often staffed by ideologues. And their work is published as soon as it's written up, without any peer review or anything. So here you have people with money influencing the kind of policy that's going to be formulated. Then on the other hand, and they often, by the way, staff these policy groups with their own members. On the other hand, you also have the use of their money to control the political process or the rule-making process. That's politics. Again, how? Through lobbying, which is a very big problem in the United States, through direct staffing. I mean, think about it. If you're a Halliburton, wouldn't you like your CEO to be the vice president of the United States? And then what happens is that the people who are now responsible to pick policy and implement policy go where? To these think tanks, these institutions. They get the ready-made tailored policies given to them, and they implement them, often with little input from left groups or working class groups or representatives of the working class or labor. Now, this is a very dirty game, I would say, and the average person would say, hold on there, this doesn't sound right to me. You're creating the rules all by yourself here. But money helps again, because with money, you have media concentration and media control. Think of Robert Murdoch, okay? So as long as you control the mass media, you can also reinforce the dominant ideology and legitimize it. And the fewer sources of independent information that you have, the less likely people are to challenge the existing relations. Now, this paper, I have to tell you, was going to be too big and had to split it. And the second half, which is not going to be presented today, talks about the relations of production and how we have to challenge them with new ideologies. So here we have the legitimation process. Now let's go back to that hegemon. Because once you have control of the policy formation within the global hegemon, now you can move on and control the policy formation for the global structure. And here we have, at this time, an emergence of what I would believe to be a global SSA. I know somebody said there is no such thing. It's all nation-specific, and I agree, there are national SSAs. However, these national SSAs are superimposed by what I believe to be emerging global social structure of regulation. The first such structure is centered around the IMF and the World Bank. In other words, we're seeing the emergence of a global financial SSA. Now, this first SSA, the global financial SSA, centered around the IMF and the World Bank, has a number of purposes. The first one is to provide regulation of the financial system. And it's doing a relatively effective job. But there's more to it. Number one, these institutions have shifted their policies toward neoliberalization of global policy, as has been done within the United States. And what that basically means is privatization and capital mobility. And all you have to do is look at the IMF policies in terms of getting loans as a lender of last resort when you're a nation. They tell you have to privatize a lot of your services, and they tell you have to have free capital flows if you want IMF help or World Bank help. So here, this SSA, the global financial regime, is promoting mobility of capital, which allows you to take your money into a country. This is not just about taking money out of a country. You also want to put money into a country if you're going to invest. So one, you have mobility to invest in the poor nations. Secondly, you have the opportunity to repatriate profits that are going to be generated in these poor nations because you don't have capital controls anymore. Thirdly, you have the ability to discipline poor governments when they try to impose new regulations or increase their taxes on your corporation or what have you. So you can say, hey, you're not playing ball, I'll go to another poor country. I'm taking my capital out overnight. Just press a button, there go all those zeros. And fourth, and this is a bonus from this new global financial regime that's being established, fourth, you can play international accounting shell games. So what corporations do is they cook the books to show all of their profits generated in the nations with the lowest tax rates and all their losses in the nations with the highest tax rates. And that's a little bonus that we get on the side. Now, the second major pillar of exploitation that I refer to is that of the emerging global trade regime centered around the WTO and various FTAs. And again, I'm going to show you something that you need to keep in mind as we go. It's going to make sense. When we had the original Fordist regime, or SSA, notice there were very few free trade agreements in the world. But as the old SSA started to crumble, look at what happened to the free trade agreements. They started increasing year by year. And of course, with the WTO in the mid-90s, they skyrocketed the number of FTA agreements. Now, what's the importance of this new SSA based on free trade, which, by the way, ironically, is not even free, and we'll get to that. Well, number one, you want the WTO and FTAs to provide you with dispute resolution mechanisms. And the jury is out as to whether they're very effective in providing dispute resolution. However, there's a more important role that this regime plays, and that is it allows corporations to move production into poor regions of the world. Why?